Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are talking about Dataset today, and we're working on a bunch of enhancements to this. So let's go ahead.
So this is a document, it's similar to something you've seen before, but this is a new proposal and it's much refined. You should take a look at that terminology. The proposal talks about specs, paths, and path specs.
Well, I'm not going to go for that form of internal capitalization, but let me try to understand.
I know you don't like that, but I mean, it's just this document that talks about that.
Okay, but so what's this? So this is options.
So just about any data set option needs to refer to elements or levels within the data set and have a way of repeating values on the right-hand side. And this is about that syntax. So it's similar to the way that specs work in grid.
Okay, how similar to the way that specs work in grid?
Pretty similar, but data set needs an extended syntax to work.
Because it's deeper than grids.
Because it's deeper is the main thing, yeah.
Okay, well, let's understand the syntax. So this syntax is compatible with the grid syntax. Is that a true statement?
Yes, I have. I have examples of that later in this document.
Okay, all right, okay. So let's just try to understand what we're trying to do here. So I see. So this is a pure spec, and then there's some kind of path-based spec. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You need to open all those sections.
Okay.
You can just open all the sections in the entire notebook. It'd be easiest.
I never remember how to do this.
Command-Shift open square bracket does it.
Why do we need that? Why does it need the dynamics, and what the heck's going on there?
You didn't evaluate the initialization. So evaluate the initialization and then close and reopen the notebook, and it'll be okay.
But this should never happen.
No. This is just a prototype. Okay. You need to set that path and then load some stuff to make this work.
Oh, I see. I have to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, something changed there.
Yeah, now close the notebook and reopen it.
Okay, now you are fixing this problem with Dataset that, or maybe you've already fixed it, that when it is in a notebook, it may not, it may not have the appropriate data to be able to go to the next page and things.
Yep, that's fixed.
Okay, and it's also fixed in the cloud. There's nothing specific.
Well, it's fixed in a branch.
Okay, I understand.
I mean, it hasn't been pulled yet.
Okay. All right. Oh, come on. Oh, that's this. Okay.
All right.
Fine. What are those gray blobs?
That's just a placeholder in the prototype. You can ignore them. They won't be there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
They give me a place to attach menus to. You can right click on that and there's a menu.
But how will you do that in the real situation?
That is yet to be resolved. That's why there's a placeholder right now.
Okay. But so there does need to be an anchor for right-clicking at that position. Is that correct?
Right.
Why aren't you just right-clicking somewhere in that cell and being happy? I mean,
that would be nice. You would think it'd be a trivial thing to do, but it's not a trivial thing to make that entire area sensitive.
Okay, well, so that's in front-end issue, right?
Yeah.
So you should just deal with that. We're not going to put in some weird thing for the...
No. It's just a placeholder. It's just something that I haven't had time to attend to yet.
Okay, so this is a path spec version where the background, I don't really like that pink, but let's just check that it is. Oh, come on, what is this?
It's just the initialization. What?
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, fine. Okay.
So there's two basic kinds of options that affect items and options that affect headers. This shows
and this drilled all the way down, because inside the Earth.
Yes, every descendant of Earth.
Huh. As opposed to merely the top level. How would I specify merely the top level of Earth?
If you give just the top level. So, I mean, what would that mean?
It means only color the things that appear as direct. I mean, this is a list of associations. Only color the things that appear. I mean, so this thing.
At the top level on the right-hand side of the Earth Association, is that what you mean?
That's what I mean, because otherwise I would expect this whole piece, including the moon label, to be affected. You're only affecting the values here.
Absolutely, and I think that's the right thing to do. You want to treat the headers differently than the items.
Right.
There isn't a way to color only the top level Earth things, and I don't. I mean, you could do them individually. You could say Earth mass and Earth radius.
Yeah, it's boring though. Yeah. Okay. Well, okay, so fine. So what are you showing me here? You're showing me.
This is just, I mean, you should just step through this sequence here. It's just sort of a top level introduction to how everything generally works. So there's item options, there are header options. And then you can use paths to get to specific elements.
Okay.
And if you want to refer to an entire row or column, you use all.
Yeah, just like you would. I mean, so this, for example, if I do this, right, and if I say this here, and then I say brackets, all comma radius.
Exactly. You're missing.
The all is in quotes.
Yes.
Okay, those are precisely the things that are then colored.
Exactly.
Okay, makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
And then header options work similarly. If you want to color the header of that column, you use all radius.
Why do I need the? I see. Because
so
I need
that. Yeah. So you can just use radius, but that's ambiguous because there are two radius columns, right? If you do that, both of them will be colored pink.
So in other words, you're saying without a path spec, if I were to just do this.
Yep. So this is a convenient syntax. It's kind of an exception, but I think it's handy. Yeah. But it's also ambiguous.
By the way, I assume this would also work. That didn't work. I think that should work.
No, well, maybe.
I think that should work. Okay, all right, let's go on.
Okay, so you just explained the principle that this works on, which is that the path specifies what you would get if you used extract to extract that part of the data set.
Great, makes sense. Now, what about the headers?
For the header options, it's the header of the things that would be extracted.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay, so the syntax overview, that this goes deeper into all the ins and outs of the syntax.
Okay, let me see which ones I don't understand here.
Why don't you open them so you can?
Oh, for goodness sake. What happened here? Oh, this is the thing. Okay. Okay, background to pink. I don't understand that. Why? Oh, I see. That's the content area's background only.
Yes.
So if I were to say header background to pink, I hate this pink.
Yes.
Okay, now if I wanted to do just these top level headers at the top here.
Yeah, you can continue down this overview that gets to that.
I want to try see if I can figure it out myself.
Okay.
So that should be, yeah, that should just be all arrow pink.
No.
Okay, why isn't that all arrow pink? Because that should be selecting all those rows and the
So
header.
that spec has to be in brackets. Yeah.
Do I have to say all like that?
In that case, you've got columns. If you have one all, it'll be rows.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Now, if I wanted to extract the headers from the data set, how would I do that?
There's not really you use keys. It's kind of convoluted.
What would I actually have to do?
You'd have to extract the level that you want the keys of and then apply keys to it.
Because I'm wondering if we shouldn't have a thing that's called header extract or something, in which you just give this thing all comma all, and it just returns that list of headers. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just like extract would return the content area.
Right.
I think we should consider that. I think it would be a nice thing I think it would be useful to be able to get the headers out.
Would it make sense to use keys as a keyword?
Possibly. Yeah, possibly.
So that would be something for your agenda, Jose, huh?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Like a key extract. That's better than header extract, I agree. Key extract.
Well, I was actually thinking about putting keys somewhere in where you have placed all, like all comma keys in extract itself.
I see. So extract data set. Well, I don't know whether the word keys is quite the right one, but something like that.
Right. Some keyword that says go to the keys.
Yeah, why not? I mean, because we have the notion, I mean, in a sense, if we have extract f of x, y, comma 0, we'll get f.
Right.
And this is kind of the analog of that.
Right. We cannot use 0 because we would get association, I guess.
No, I understand. But that's the notion, is it's the okay. All right, let's keep going here.
So that's an interesting notion. If we had that kind of syntax, then maybe
we could avoid having header background.
Exactly.
I'm not sure we'd want to avoid it. I think it's a convenient concept to have.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree that I think we should, I mean, this would be an alternative way to get to it. And it might be useful if we have to replicate header on some other options which are less common. It might be a good way to deal with that. Okay. All rows should be pink. Okay, fine. Okay, first row pink, and that's fine. Why does the pink have to be in braces?
Because the first element refers to rows, so the first level of the data set, the second element refers to columns of the second level, and so forth. Sorry. Otherwise, there's an ambiguity. If it were just a naked list, is it a list of specs, or is it a self of spec? And I've resolved it by saying the right-hand side is always a list of specs.
And is that the same way that grid resolves it?
Well, a grid doesn't have this issue. In grid, it's always a list of row column.
I see.
Or actually, in grid, I think it's column row, which is unfortunate. It doesn't match data set.
What's it going to be in table view?
I don't know.
Better investigate that. Sorry, I still don't understand. If I said none comma pink here, what would that mean?
Well, you can do it. It'll work in that case because pink is a shorthand for.
For what?
So pink just means make globally everything pink, or in this case, it means make the first.
No, it didn't do the same thing.
Well,
I don't understand what that
okay. Oh no, sorry. That was a wrong explanation. So this means this is just like grid. It means make the first item of that level pink. So it's making the first column pink.
What?
It's just
this
like
one here. I see. So if I were to do this, if I were to say, instead of just pink there, I would just say pink comma yellow. Then I would get, I see, that's good.
Right.
Fair enough.
And what is the role of none there?
It's so that you're talking about columns rather than rows. If you remove the none, it would apply that to rows.
Right. So then it will be, the Venus will be pink and Earth will be yellow. Looks good. Okay.
Sorry, but shouldn't it be all then? Because none seems to be suggesting don't take any columns while you're actually getting all of them.
None means don't apply any value. This is not.
This isn't a path spec. This is
not
a spec,
the path.
no path
It's
spec.
the value.
Oh, I see.
None would be on the left-hand side. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So the later things take precedence.
Yeah.
Or is it more specific things take precedence?
No, later things.
Okay. Oh boy. So this is a cyclic thing, which probably we should have had a wrapper for. We should have a wrapper. Don't we have a wrapper in permutations for this? Cycles, blah, blah, blah.
No, cycles is the notation of the permutation itself. We have discussed in the past having a structure array type called cyclic array.
Yes.
Or periodic array or something like that. But
which I think we should consider. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. But I think this is okay for now. Okay. By the way, background noise. Okay, looking good.
So I do feel like there is one use case that, if you want to give background color for both header and the column, say, like if I want mass, I want to highlight the header as well as the values.
In here?
Yeah.
I agree, that's fairly ugly now.
What you want to color those headers as well as the items?
She wants to color the whole big chunk, the whole big row there, not this situation here where you've got this is uncolored, but its content is colored. Yeah. Just wants to go across the whole thing here. Now, if we had a way of referring, so we could imagine. Okay, so for example, here's a possible thing we can imagine doing here. If we said, something like this. So right now, if I say Earth goes to cyan, I get that, right?
Yeah.
But what Sushma wants, and we could imagine Earth, keys goes to cyan, colors just the headers. And we could imagine that something like Earth, full goes to cyan, does everything.
Wait a minute. So Earth, keys, Earth would refer to rows, and keys would refer to columns in your example.
Ugh. Okay, well, how do I get?
You want to say something like Earth items and keys is what you're trying to say?
No, in that particular case, I'm trying to say, in this case here, I'm simply saying color that particular thing, which I could get by saying header background, arrow. I believe I can do this, can't I?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so now the issue is, if I were to do the following thing, if I were to do this and that, then that will do almost what Sushma wants, except that it still missed the moon.
Which you can add.
Which I could add, right. But the issue is, if I just want to take that whole, I agree with you. I don't understand why background doesn't apply to the header by default. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In other words, why isn't it that whole row, including its header, that gets colored?
Well, I can take that into consideration and see if there's a way of generalizing the syntax to do that.
Well, or having even the default. It's not obvious to me the default is right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to do that. It's one thing to do the default if you have a path spec. In the case of a pure spec, I don't really see it's necessarily right. I mean, what do spreadsheets do for this? Do they highlight the row specifier as well? I think they do.
I'm not a spreadsheet user.
I think in spreadsheet we can fill each cell,
but not the header, but not that thing.
I think I don't know enough to actually comment on that, but
we need to ask somebody who knows.
No, but header can be filled too. I mean, what I'm saying is I don't know if I can just select the entire row and color everything the same. That is something I need to. I mean, it's easy.
Yeah. Okay.
To find,
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, the question is, when you do that, does it also color the header, or does it only color the content?
Okay, I can find that out. Yes.
Right. But I mean, I tend to think that coloring the header as well is the most useful thing to do.
Okay.
Okay. This is where it'd be lovely if there are people on our live stream who have comments about this. We'd love to hear them. We either don't have anybody there or everybody's quiet today. Okay. Or everybody is just bored out of their mind with this topic, which they shouldn't be. Okay. 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 Specific items. Okay, so this case, that is a content item. And what happens if you specify the header? I mean, I could imagine that you would specify the triangulation, so to speak, onto that item. That is, Earth and radius.
Yeah, I could do that.
Why not? Seems useful. Sandra on our live stream says, this seems like an Excel feature. He's not sure how much this is all going to be used. We'll see. I think if it's nicely done, it will be used. And I think also another question is whether we're going to have an attached cell for this data set where you can select things. I mean, whether we should be thinking of an attached cell for data sets, just like we have an attached cell for images, for example.
For what functionality would be in the cell?
I don't know. I mean, it's things to do with selection. It's just kind of a user discovery type thing.
Yeah.
But I think we should consider that. We haven't discussed doing that. But I mean, we could certainly imagine extracting particular rows and columns and so on.
Which you can do Already.
Of course, but you have to know the syntax. I mean,
it's in the menus, in the header menus. There's copy. Right click on a header. So copy position or paste position.
Splaffle raffle. What is that?
It's just broken in this prototype.
Okay. Is there a way of discovering? Let's see. So if I say copy data to clipboard, is that going to work, or is that also going to?
It may be broken as well.
Okay. All right. Fine. Okay. Let's keep going. Item and header option behavior.
Right. So there's a slight difference here, which I'm not entirely happy with. So for items, if you just specify background pink, everything's pink. If you specify all rows pink, that has the same effect because every item is in a row, right? Those are equivalent syntaxes. For headers, is different. If you say all headers pink,
thrills deeply. Yeah.
It does what you expect. All headers are pink. But if you put it in a list so that it only refers to rows, only the row headers are pink.
Okay.
So that means if you try to use the header background option to specify a global value of pink and a local value of something else, it probably won't behave the way you expect because the first pink is going to apply only to the row headers. So there's not really a way within a list of specs to specify a global value that applies to everything. You can only specify values that apply to levels, particular levels. I don't think that's great, but I don't have a solution yet.
Okay, hold on. Why is this different for headers and for actual backgrounds?
Because
I see. Actual backgrounds, as soon as you did the row one, it's just global.
Because every item is in both a row and a column. Whereas for headers, they're either in a row or a column.
Okay. I see. Well, I mean, of course, this changes its complexion if you do this thing of defaulting to, in this case, defaulting to also color the headers.
Yeah.
And then you have to undo that by having a header background to none for something.
No, that would not undo it. Header background none means just let whatever value is specified previously prevail.
Okay, so then header background arrow automatic would have to be the thing that undoes.
Yeah, that would do it.
Will that do it now?
Should.
Okay. Oh boy. Okay. All right. So I think that particular issue. Let's keep going. Let's come back to that because I think it's affected.
So this is what I mentioned earlier. If the left-hand side is not a list, which indicates a path, then it gives you a convenient way of referring to headers if they're unique. If they're not unique,
it's kind of weird. but it's okay.
I mean, especially for headers, you don't always want to.
What's that? Hello? You disappeared.
Yeah, sorry, my phone was ringing. I muted. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just a convenience, so that sometimes you just want to say, make, if Earth is unique, you just want to say make Earth,
Yeah, I get it.
You don't want to have to specify a path.
We talked about this already.
Yep.
Color blending.
So you should look at the last example there. So you can use none. So if you make the first row pink, you can use none on the column spec to let the row color show through.
What?
So the column spec says make columns alternately cyan and none. If it's none, then whatever the previous prevailing color shows through.
As opposed to that being automatic, doing that behavior.
As opposed to it being automatic or being white or whatever.
So what would automatic do in this case?
It would make it white.
Because
white's the default. Oops. That's surprising. That's probably a bug.
Okay, fine. All right, but so automatic goes to the base default, not to the proximate coloration.
The base default, yeah.
That's a good point from Sander here. Wouldn't it be cool if you could color the background based on values? That is, to have a background function.
Yeah.
That is a good idea. And we can imagine a background function that would take values. I mean, I agree, I've needed that a bunch of times, and I've built that, and it's kind of a nuisance to go out to get something which will actually fill the cells, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Let's talk about that in a minute. Let's see if we can. I mean, in other words, what that would be is something which needs two pieces of information, and maybe they're part of background itself. It needs the piece of information. Yeah, in fact, I mean, one can imagine it being part of background, because on the one hand, you're saying this is the location, and then on the other hand, you're saying, and there's also a value function that does something.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, you could imagine that if I'm saying all, comma, and then there's a function as the next argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sandra is suggesting background color scaling and background color function. One of the issues with scaling is what is the universal set, so to speak, over which the scaling is done. Because you might, on the one hand, you might want it for the whole data set, or you might just want it for some localized region. But I really like the idea of data-dependent coloring. I think that's interesting. And now, yeah, I mean, so by the way, I assume that in this right-click menu that you will have a styling option here.
I haven't anticipated that. No, it could be.
But I think you should, because I think that way, if you had a styling option there, then it's going to get a lot less obscure. I mean, in other words, you're basically filling in these weird options with a GUI. And I can imagine you're looking at a data set and you want to highlight a particular piece of that data set. So let's go through the workflow here. I highlight one of these things. I say, okay, make it red. Okay. Now I want to harvest that highlighting programmatically, so to speak.
Right. We talked about this last time. And there were two ways to do it. One would be like a little button at the bottom of the data set, which works like manipulates paste. And And the other would be simply to evaluate the data set.
Okay, well, either one is okay with me, but I mean, they should both work, I think. If is there a problem with them both working? But then what I would get is that then if I say options of that, then I would then be able to harvest the thing that was added there.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, we've never had a function called harvest. We have sow and reap, but we don't have harvest. Just one of those functions we could consider sometime. Never mind. I do think that yeah, actually 2 points here. So Fitzmurphy on our live stream is pointing out that styling will be more helpful with themes. Do we imagine that we should have some themes for data sets? Do we imagine that?
Sure, we could do that.
I mean, I think in particular, the themes would do things like determine the, that gray color that's used for the data set headers and things.
Yeah.
The other thing that I could imagine theming is the way that elision works inside the cells.
Yeah.
Which is another issue similar to background. And do you have an option which controls how the elision is working?
Yes, but it's broken right now. I renamed it, and apparently something went wrong.
Okay.
It was called elisions. I changed it to hidden items.
Okay, now Sandra is making some comment here about the RHS of the rule of function. What? So I don't quite understand that. I mean, in other words, so if this is a raw pink, okay, so this is now, I'm adding a section here. This is some value dependent styling, right, or content dependent styling. Now let's talk about what that might be. So it might be depends on a value, or it could be depends on a header. Because remember, you're showing headers that are words. They may not always be words.
Yeah.
Even if they were words, one could imagine doing something where it says, do a string match. I mean, this also relates to determine, okay, so let's say in depends on value, we could imagine doing something like background, arrow, and then some function should be the right-hand side of the rule.
Right, you don't want to do the matching on the left-hand side. You want to do it on the right-hand side.
What do you mean by matching? What?
Well, you could imagine having like a pattern which would match all headers that contain E on the left-hand side, and then arrow pink.
Yes.
But I explicitly disallow that because otherwise you can't make sense of specs. So specs kind of assume a rectangular sub data set so that you have a clear notion of what are the rows and columns, successive rows and columns. If you just can match arbitrary things which are not rectangular, you can't make sense of the rows and columns in a spec.
Okay, but here, if what we want to do is imagine, for example, actually, I mean, look.
But it could just be if the right-hand side is a function, then it gets,
right.
Yeah.
Then it gets applied to, I mean, I think that's what Sandra is suggesting, and I kind of agree with that.
But
right.
Shouldn't this be like map indexed, in which the function itself takes two arguments, the value and the position?
Right.
Well, you might want it to take a second argument of the position, yes, which you could ignore most of the time. But even if you give an all there, it's still going to index over those things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Right? So the function could be the value and the extract spec, basically, your path spec.
You could conceivably, even if your data set has keys, you might want to have numeric indices as well as keys, or instead of keys.
Well, that's a different thing. So that might be something else. But in this case, so let's take a look at what this would look like. We would be saying arrow, if hash greater than 0, green, otherwise red. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty civilized. It's pretty civilized and interesting. Yeah, I don't see any reason not to do that.
Yeah, no, I like the idea.
Now, there is a question of the color function scaling business. I don't think that's relevant here. I don't think this is I don't think it's a plotting story, so to speak. I think this is really a literal values story. I don't think scaling is relevant. I mean, there is a question, what if you wanted to do this coloring based on, the extreme case is, but I think that's silly. I think that's, okay. Imagine you wanted to run a anomaly detect on the data set or on a column of the data set. And then based on the anomaly detect, you want to color things. So coloring based on anomaly detect, how could you do that? Or some other global criterion. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Perhaps the argument is that the values will not be numeric in general, so they cannot be rescaled.
That is also correct, yes. No, scaling isn't really the thing. My question is, what if you want to do computation? Because right now, the dataset operations that you can do dig into the content and return a new data set based on content, but can it return a new data set with different styling? Do you understand what I'm saying? So if I were to say something like this, where this data set, okay, then I want to say something like, I don't even know how to do this, total comma all, I think. Okay. Not very exciting for the identity matrix, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know any way. Well, here, let's see what happens if I'm to saying reverse all. Okay. But what I don't know how to do, that will affect the content of the data set, right? But what if I wanted to affect the styling of the data set? Get what I'm saying? What if I wanted to? Go ahead.
No, I get what you're saying.
So we're using its content-dependent styling, dynamically generated content-dependent styling. See, the problem is that this metaphor only returns. It returns a data set. This returns a data set which has had its innards munged, right? But we can't return a data set that's had its options munged right now. I mean, is there a set options metaphor for what to do there? So if we say set options on the data set, we can certainly do that, right?
Yeah.
So if I say here, if I take that data set and I say, okay, what does that mean? How should that work? I mean, this is the analog of a show. I see, that's not what we want to do. What we would do is a data set here. Is that correct? Yes. It's a self. Well, the question is, how do we get that thing to depend on a function of the first data set? Well, I leave that as a challenge here. I'm not sure we know right now.
Yeah.
But I can see that being wanting to be a thing, because it's like, okay, take this data set, find the anomalies in it, and highlight them.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question. If in data set, just like in a graphic, the way we do that is interesting. Okay. If we were to have a symbolic wrapper for the content of something. So let's say I were to spray. Okay, if I sprayed style hash background arrow red, you know what? We have a way to do this. We have this item, don't we? We have this mechanism for saying item something or other here, right?
In grid, yeah.
So what do we do here? Item style. But is there a way of wrapping the item, it's the thing itself, with an item, right?
No, because I think there's a fundamental difference between grid and dataset in that respect. Grid is a formatting construct. Dataset, I mean, you don't want to go in and insert styling into the data, right?
Why is item something that shows up there? You know what? This is not such a stupid thing. No, look, this is a way of inserting metadata into the data set.
You mean at the construction time it will be removed and placed somewhere else?
That's a possibility. So in other words, let's imagine what we did was we said item background arrow red, okay? And that then as part of the evaluation of data set, that would be stripped and turned into an outer option. So in other words, what I could do is if I could say here, I could map onto the data set something that says if the value is greater than 75, put an item background red in that position, but that would then evaporate from the actual content of the data set and would migrate to its options. I don't think this is totally stupid. And we could do, in fact, the same thing with grid if we wanted to. It doesn't really matter because, as you say, it's purely a formatting thing.
Mm-hmm.
I like this idea. I think this is useful because I think otherwise there's no easy way. This is quite an easy way to go and say, go scan through this data set and somewhere, content dependently color this thing, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Take a think about it. I like
Yeah.
that idea. Okay, so Sandra on our live stream is commenting that in Excel, there's a color scale background that will automatically scale between min and max. So that is effectively the color function. That's effectively a color function or a background color function. right? Right. I mean, so.
Yeah.
Perhaps he's commenting on the scaling, color scaling.
Well, no, he's pointing out that I have no idea. Will automatically scale between min and max, but min or max for that column or min or max for the whole spreadsheet? Well, I think that there's a question here, and certainly with this item mechanism, you're not absolutely stuck in terms of doing something which extracts a column and then does something to it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, let's keep going in your thing. I actually really like this idea of being able to, because it sort of mixes the symbolic way of being able to sort of represent things with so Sander is suggesting here that if we were to say things like all arrow rainbow, as opposed to, or simply color, because that would be essentially color data rainbow, right? Rather than, so that in fact is using our function idea. Yeah, that's using our function idea, but not, if we could pack into that something that dealt with the scaling, we would be golden, because that way, this thing here, this idea up here, will already work with this, except that color data rainbow doesn't know how to do the scaling. If we're doing color data to a 1, 2, 3 in indexed color, that will be fine. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Does it take a second argument with a range, and then the user?
I don't know. It should do. It doesn't. That would be a good idea if it did. I wonder whether it does. No, but it's a good idea if it did. So that's a separate issue.
Ranges there at the end.
Where the ranges get put? Oh, I see. They get put inside like that.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
It's not terrible, but it doesn't have a way of saying get the range automatically. It could. I mean, I'm sure that could be an automatic there that would get the range automatically from that data. Sandra is pointing us to this, although it's not clear what this, yeah. Okay, so that's within a column. That's doing that. So you select that. Okay, but I do think, I mean, the fundamental point here is content dependent. I see, you specify the range to color. I see, because it works by having a selection. It's a I forget, it's a GUI thing. It's not a programmatic thing. So in other words, that would be like us having a way of selecting this and then saying, by the way, why does single click not bring up a menu? Well, I'm sorry, why does left click not, whichever click? For me, and because I have a left-handed mouse, it's the other way around, but it doesn't matter. But for the ordinary click, why does that not bring up? What does that do on a data set?
Nothing except on a header, which drills down.
So that's another thing to discuss, is what it should do on what even hover should do. I don't know why hover, I mean, so hover is doing this down here. That's nice, but should hover also put a raft in place that you could then do something with, but giving a discovery interface for the right click, basically. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, so we talked about adding hover menus to header items, but we don't have the technology to support that currently.
Okay, all right. So that's for the future, but it does seem like a reasonable idea. Okay, let's look at the last two things. Well, gosh, not the last.
So you can skip that if you want. That's a little bit of a detour.
What is it?
It's explaining that background is a little bit of an exception. You specified separate row and column colors. They blend just like they do in grid, depending on how they're specified, so that you can make these kinds of.
Okay, so what you're saying is in these cases, so normally later wins.
Right.
Except that if you specify a whole row and a whole column, they blend.
Yes. And the only reason for that is to support this grid behavior where you can make these, grids that are easy to read because you can follow the rows and columns.
Well, it's nice, but I mean, I don't understand why other things wouldn't want to be blendable as well.
Well, I can't think of another case where that's really useful.
I can. I mean, you've got a whole region in the data set that is sort of the blue area, and then there's one guy in the middle who's red.
Yeah. And
you want that to look different from the red one in the middle of the green area.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it seems like kind of a fringe case to me, but.
It is a bit, but I mean, I don't understand.
If you want to do that, you can do it using blend explicitly.
Why do you put the blend?
You just
you mean
specify the color,
the value of the color.
Yeah.
But the fact is that your idea of later overrides earlier is being violated by this row and column case.
Well, it's not violated. I mean, it's a different syntax, right? It depends on whether they're separate specs.
Okay, but if you gave them as path specs, you're saying they would not blend. If I give two different path specs,
yes, I'm saying
that overlap. Yeah, I don't think that's great. So in this syntax, there's a special case where it blends. Yeah, I mean, I can see that these are distinct cases. It's not obvious to me this is correct. Okay, so you're making the choice that path specs, disjoint, successive path specs overwrite.
Yes. If they blend, you're screwed. There's no way to explicitly say, don't blend these things, just use this color.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I mean, clearly in our friendly, world of functions here, we could imagine the case where this is fun path spec and, previous or something, okay, and previous layer effectively, in principle, right, where that would give us access to whatever the color so far was.
Yeah.
It's perhaps crazy. The problem is we can't really change the, I mean, by the time we're doing this, it's like we're almost feeding a whole association into this thing, which we don't want to do because this case is really nice. But we could imagine this. We could imagine this. Have a think about this. It may be crazy, but okay, combining and overriding and style options.
This is a related thing. So if you have item style, there can be lots of different styles for sizes and bold and all of that. So the way I've implemented it, like styles override and different styles combine. So that first row is 12-point bold. The first column is 24-point italic. So what you end up in the 1-1 position is bold italic.
I understand. It's a blend.
24 overrides 12.
Seems sensible to me. What would I do if I wanted to go back to the base for, but in here, what would I do if I wanted to say this thing is definitively italic 24, but not bold, but ignore what came before?
Then you specify plain.
What's that?
Just for one item, or?
Well, I'm wondering if there's an overall override. or whether you just have to back out. I mean, it's not very modular if you have to back out what you had.
Where would an overall override go?
But I don't know. I think, look, honestly, this is what style is doing anyway. So there's no real, I mean, this is no different from nested styles.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't think, I mean, if nested styles haven't bitten us in 30 years, this is probably going to be okay.
Yeah, okay.
Style options, colors override rather than blend. I agree.
So this is just pointing out that the top level list is always interpreted as a list of specs.
Okay, and then the insanity of this more deeply encrusted creature is that.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
it gets to be kind of deep.
And now, just so I understand, if I were to do this and I were to do a brace green yellow, then I would have a magnificent coat of many colors.
Yes.
Okay, it's lovely. And if I were to do that in a further insanity, how do I get an identity tensor? How do I get or can I do that with Levi-Civita tensor? How do I?
Yes, that's good. Yeah.
Rank 3. Do I just do that?
Yep. Perhaps you need normal.
That's interesting that doesn't work. Shouldn't that work? I think that should work. Dataset of a sparse array should just work.
Well, perhaps structurally it does work, but
it doesn't look like it worked. I think, Chris, I think you should look at that. I think something went wrong there.
No, it's correct.
What's correct?
Because that's laid out. The first layer of the third
dimension. This is right, but this isn't right.
Oh.
Yes, I think it's that setting which is refusing to normalize, because this could be huge.
No, I don't think it's the type setting. I think it's the data set itself. I think the data set just thinks there's one element and it's the sparse array, rather than cracking open the sparse array.
I see what you mean.
I think it should crack open the sparse array.
Yep.
Okay, so what you're saying here, if I go down yet another level here and I say red, blue, magnificent. Okay, I mean, I don't really know why. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, cool. You can give some examples of these. I mean, this particular one isn't particularly useful, but might be more useful if these were gray levels, and then that was the things that corresponded to the. Actually, let me just do that because I'm just curious what that does. Oh, I see. If I were to just do, hold on a second. If I were to just do light pink, no, this will be boring. Light green, because there's no variation. This will just be a uniform color.
Mud color, yeah.
Okay. But if I were to vary, let's imagine each one. Is that right?
That's going to give you alternating rows.
Yeah, right. So now I want to do. Yeah, okay. I don't know why that one is. Why is that one white?
I don't know. That's odd. I'll have to look into that. I wouldn't expect it to be white.
Perhaps you need 3 colors in each list?
No, I mean.
Oh, right.
Oh,
You're missing a level of list. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So then what I really want is. Oh, for goodness sake, why did that do that? Why did that do that? Why did it give an error? Well, maybe it isn't a real error. Okay, that's sort of interesting, mildly interesting. Okay. Dataset and grid option syntaxes.
So in general, you can do in dataset what you can do in grid, but rows and columns are swapped.
So in dataset, wait a minute, why is that for grid? Because grid has chosen that the one argument case is columns or what?
Yeah, so it's in grid, for whatever reason, it's columns, comma, rows for the specs.
That's probably because it degenerates to columns only, right? In other words, if you don't give the two element form, it'll just apply to columns. Yeah. I suspect that's why that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think, though, grid is probably not a I mean, there's an argument that we should take all of the formatting, all of the equipment of, there's an argument you should just use Dataset as the primary formatter because it's getting pretty good. And, it's so often that you want to do operations on it. So why not allow that?
Yeah.
Option arrow value is equivalent to a null path spec being that.
Right. Null path spec just means, the top level.
Right. But the second, if it was background arrow, pink, cyan, comma, red, green, or comma, red, for example, whatever it is, then that would no longer be true. This is only the one argument form.
No, it's the naked right-hand side. Or sorry, if the right-hand side is not a list. I think, now that I think about it, this is only true for item options. This is not true for headers. Is it? Wait a minute. I need to revisit that.
This would be magnificent, this way of doing it. And this is honestly a much less insane way of doing alternating rows. This allows you to do all kinds of wild things with yeah, I agree with this.
That's going to take some work to implement. It's going to require some significant restructuring.
Well, it isn't necessary for version 1.
Okay.
Okay, on our live stream, someone with an unpronounceable handle points out that in Excel, alternating entire row colors based on the value in a column, effectively visually grouping common terms. Content-sensitive formatting. Yeah, we've been talking about content-sensitive formatting. I agree, but the question is how, well, honestly, alternating in row colors based on the value in a column, visually grouping common items. I don't entirely understand that. Seems to me we should...
Sounds like something like split applied to styling.
Seems to me we should do a little bit of discovery of what spreadsheets have been doing on this coloring stuff. But clearly we've got a long way here. The main thing we sort of introduced in this review is content-based styling. And I really like the idea of using item as a flexible way to do that, because item would let you programmatically add whatever styling you want and have it not mess up the content of your data set.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way. I think then we can look at these different operations. You have to think about what you do with different operations, like mapping item. Particularly if item had a curried form, we might be able to do something pretty nice. I don't think item does have a curried form right now, or does it? It does not. We are in luck.
Well, given that there are options, should an item of expression be equivalent to expression?
Well, that would be the other possibility. Yeah, in which case we don't get the currying thing. But I think we just have to try some cases of this. I have a feeling this is going to work rather nicely. And we may yet find ourselves wanting a curried form, but I agree it's a little bit of a weird curried form if the you know, because normally you would expect the zero option case to be just don't apply options. So I admit that that's weird, and maybe currying is a bad idea. All right. Great. Well, that was a nicely presented review. Good. So other things with Dataset are chugging along fine. Is that true?
Yeah. I implemented some of the things that we talked about in our last meeting, and I have more to do.
Okay. But I mean, all of the robustness with large amounts of data and things, is that coming in nicely?
Well, I'm not going to attend to that until I get all this redesign done. There's no sense in trying to make things efficient if they're going to change.
Fine.
So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think the other big issue is user assistance for querying data sets, because that stuff is really pretty hard to use. I mean, it's pretty hard to remember how that all works. And it would be nice to, I mean, that's the thing we need to explore, is what we can do either with attached cells or auto completions, etc., to help that stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, auto completion would be a really good start. Like, and maybe some stuff is in these header menus. You know, maybe we put some actual operations in the header menus as well as sorting and things. The other thing, just a coming attraction that I should mention, is the idea of a data set of a relational database.
Right. We talked about that last meeting.
Okay. Is that underway? Is somebody looking at that? Where basically you're compiling the data set queries into the underlying SQL queries, ultimately.
Yeah. Sushma, do you remember if, I think that was directed towards someone. I don't remember who it was.
That is for database integration team, not here, but
are you sure? I mean, I don't think they know that because I just talked to them this morning.
Yeah, I need to send that to them.
Okay, and remember, Todd is now managing that group.
Okay.
Because I think what we would want to do there is for simple dataset queries that are successfully compilable into SQL, it should just work. In other words, I mean, just to be clear on what we think should work, you know, if I do something like this, and then I simply say data set of that, right? Then I should make a sort of virtualized data set, and we need to know what it's going to display here, right? It's going to be some kind of blob that displays some virtualized data set. And then you should be able to do things like say, you know, all comma total here and have that just work. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be nice.
I think it's almost spectacular if it can make it work. And then the other thing that is also desired, just to be clear on the roadmap, is a CSV file, for example, or I think what is more realistic is an HDF file, where we're doing the same thing, where the HDF file is sitting on the you know, in the file system, and we then do this. Okay.
So I know that CSV file displays as a data set.
What do you mean?
I mean, you can import a CSV file and make it display as a data set.
Oh, I understand that. But what I'm saying is there's no importing involved. The thing's sitting on the disk.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's the Leonid, processing data like a snake or something. The thing where you're chunking the data you're processing and so on. If that makes sense. So in other words, you're never reading the whole thing in. And I believe, so that was the discussion we were recently having, and I forget who it was with, about doing that with HDF and not being able to do that with CSV. You might ask Shadi what the story with that is. Okay, I'm being reminded that tomorrow is Thursdays are our Twitch talks. Developers talking about all kinds of interesting new things in version 12. And tomorrow is I'm now just trying to read what this is saying. I'm confused here. Okay, Etienne is talking about machine learning tomorrow. It'll be good. Check it out. Okay. All right. Thanks all here. Very nice.
Sorry, please save that notebook before you close it.
I just did.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. See you guys soon. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the comments.
Bye.
Bye.